The ancient Egyptian civilization is widely accepted as sophisticated enough to construct massive pyramids that amaze us today. However, it could be hard to imagine that these ancient people stepped foot on the Americas long before Christopher Columbus did. Joe Rogan has unearthed proof of this when he talked about the discovery of a 5,000-year-old map of America that was found in Egypt. Who made the discovery? What shocking detail does it contain? And how did the ancient Egyptian civilization know about the Americas enough to draw its map? Stay tuned as we bring you Joe Rogan dissecting the 5,000-year-old map of America discovered in Egypt that reveals a terrifying secret.
When you're talking about the Nile and we're talking about ancient Egypt, how far back do you think that goes?
The notion that different types of civilization can coexist on the same planet shouldn't be surprising to us because we do it. And that's what I'm suggesting was the case back then. But a civilization very different from our own. They certainly had technology, enough technology to explore the Earth, enough technology to map the Earth, very advanced astronomy, knowledge of obscure astronomical phenomena such as the precession of the equinoxes, such as the obliquity of the ecliptic. I won't go into details, but it's present in ancient knowledge.
Many of our viewers might be hearing about the Nagada culture for the first time. However, it is a culture that has caused one of the biggest controversies in the study of ancient human history because of what it implies. If viewed dispassionately, it is not hard to see how the Nagada civilization shaped the old Egyptian civilization. Much of what has been discovered about the Nagada civilization is traced back to the late Neolithic and early Chalcolithic periods, which has been dated back to 4000 BCE or even beyond. The culture has been divided into three different periods: the Nagadan I or Amratian, the Nagada II or Girzian, and the Nagada III or Proto-Dynastic. Each of these phases has fascinated scientists and archaeologists with the rich ancient discoveries that showcase their familiarity with and use of technology and art. They have also proven to have a social structure that many experts thought was not in existence until much later. The Nagada civilization was located on the verdant and fertile banks of the popular Nile River, and it was this easy access to rich natural resources that proved to be one of the biggest factors to their success as a group of ancient people. They have been discovered to be a deeply agricultural society, which was hardly surprising due to their strategic location. However, what has amazed researchers was the huge level of prosperity that they achieved. They found it hard to believe the Nagada people had the technology to make agriculture very profitable because of the time they lived. However, we have found evidence that they successfully cultivated wheat and barley. They also were skilled in raising flocks of sheep and goats. An implication of their success with tending animals for consumption is that they had a settled lifestyle rather than a nomadic existence. Researchers have also discovered pottery made by the ancient Nagada people. These masterful pieces ranged from simple, wavy-handled objects to intricately designed and decorated ceramics of the Nagada II and Nagada III eras. Much of the articles and objects were for utilitarian purposes, but their designs were unmistakable cultural expressions and evidence of their technological sophistry. This is the part that scientists tend to argue a lot about: the impact of the Nagada culture on the early Egyptian civilization. Perhaps the most compelling part about these ancient people is their role in the very beginning of the Egyptian state. According to some scientists, based on the evidence available to them, by the Nagada III era, a distinct social pattern had been developing. They have noted that social stratification was starting to emerge, and the first seeds of centralized leadership were sown. These two concepts would prove to be the key elements in the formation of the unified Egyptian state. Archaeological findings from these periods supporting this theory include the discovery of grand tombs and ceremonial structures. These two, when found in any civilization, usually suggest the existence of a powerful elite group that controlled the society. It could also suggest the early days of kingship. The discovery of the Nagata civilization is credited to Sir William Matthew Flinders Petrie. The explorer carried out excavations in the town in 1894 in his effort to study and categorize what would later be known as prehistoric settlements near the Nile Valley. Thanks to Petrie's meticulous system for recording artifacts, we have some of the most detailed descriptions, drawings, and photographs of these ancient people, and also a knowledge of the pre-dynastic period of ancient Egypt. Petrie excavated a huge cemetery containing about 2,000 graves, which was very unusual for that time period because of its size and arrangement. The tombs varied in several aspects, another pointer to the social stratification already existing at the time. There were graves that were nothing more than simple pits, sited not far from very elaborate resting places made from wooden materials. Even more eye-opening are the objects found inside some of the graves. Petrie found pottery, tools, and weapons buried with presumably their owners. One of the most studied objects that Petrie unearthed in these graves was a unique black-topped redware. It would become a hallmark of the old Nagata civilization. However, the majority of the ceramics found here were functional, although they bore decorations that afforded us insights into the artistic leaning or partiality of the people. Petrie also found some hieroglyphic symbols that predated many of those now associated with Old Egypt. In fact, this discovery was crucial to our understanding of the origins and development of the art of writing in ancient Egypt. These symbols were more or less some of the earliest instances of written language in Egypt. What is even more interesting is that some of the artifacts from these eras bore symbols that would later feature prominently in the iconography adopted by the royal ruling class of Egypt. Petrie also discovered vessels made from stone, figurines, and pallets. He and his mates were shocked by the high level of craftsmanship involved, with their delicate shapes and polished surfaces that still shined thousands of years after they were buried. Research later proved that the pallets, which served as equipment for crushing minerals for cosmetic purposes, would later develop into ceremonial objects. Also, the figurines, mostly animals and humans, symbolized the religious aspects of the Nagata people. Petrie also unearthed the architectural practices of the Nagata people, revealing a level of advancement that was not thought to be possible for their time. The ancient people built mud brick structures, another evidence of the settled existence of a people that grew crops and raised animals. In fact, the way the settlements were laid out later influenced the urban plans and architecture of the Egyptian eras that followed, including the major cities. In addition, theories have suggested that the surprisingly high level of craftsmanship and mature trading networks from the Nagata civilization became the economic foundation that helped the Old Kingdom develop its complex administrative systems. An example was the trade in exotic materials like the lapis lazuli, extracted in Afghanistan, and obsidian sourced from ancient Ethiopia, which is evidence of the far-reaching trading connections of the ancient Nagata people. The researchers have also noted how these extensive trading networks made the exchange of cultural ideas possible and helped bring together the diverse people inhabiting the Nile riverbanks, bringing them together into a cohesive state. Many people are shocked that a civilization as advanced as the Nagata people existed at the time. However, there is something else that will shock them even more. Some of these ancient people knew about America, and they probably visited. Most mainstream scholars are not comfortable with this idea because it threatens to turn upside down everything we have been taught. Christopher Columbus is widely accepted as the first non-American person to step foot in America, but was he beaten to it by the Egyptians thousands of years before his time? A group of paintings discovered in an ancient site in Egypt could be the final proof that these ancient people were well aware of the existence of the place now known as the Americas long before the Europeans started building boats. These paintings contain maps that show the Old World and the continent of America. The site of the discovery of these paintings was a town named Hierakonpolis, or Nekhen, as it was known in the era. Hierakonpolis, a prehistoric city used as a royal residence. It is an important ancient site, because of its role in our understanding of the development and evolution of the Egyptian civilization. This city was the capital of Upper Egypt from around the end of the prehistoric period to the times of the early dynastic era. Hierakonpolis was a bubbling urban center or town. It was big and important enough to have cemeteries nearby to the deserts. This town was a complex settlement that comprised housing structures, temples, and other functional buildings. One of the temples is more significant. It was a mud brick and stone, with a large enclosure made from mud brick. This showed that the city was closely tied to the religious order of the day. But what has fascinated scientists the most about Hierakonpolis is the many artifacts obtained from there, and the wealth of information some of them have provided us about the global movement of the people of ancient times. One of the most spectacular and controversial is the series of paintings bearing a special kind of map. These painted maps, on closer inspection, reveal that their true function was much more than decoration. They could have been used for navigating the high seas and directing marine traffic. Many people who have observed this map have been able to make out the unmistakable outlines of continents. Another thing they usually point out is the degree of accuracy of the land masses represented, including all the geographical features. There is a distinct map of America, proving these Egyptian painters knew about the continent long before Columbus was born. These maps, however, were not only about the Americas. There are the maps of Europe, Asia, and Africa, and these too were presented in a high level of detail that appeared impossible for that time era. The map even includes many of the well-known geographical features of today, including the Nile River, the Mediterranean Sea, and the breathtaking mountain ranges of Eurasia. The big question, however, is, how did these ancient map makers know about America while making their paintings in Egypt? It is a known fact that ancient Egypt was not good only at building pyramids and other elaborate burial structures. They were also good shipbuilders, which kind of makes sense when you factor in that they were also good marine navigators. The Nile River was right there in their backyard. Using the popular waterway as a conduit for goods and transportation gave them the chance to perfect their sailing skills. In fact, one of the most famous ships of ancient times was the Khufu ship, which was found at the site of the Giza Pyramid. The ship was built around 2500 BCE and is proof of the shipbuilding prowess of the ancient Egyptian civilization. But did these Egyptians ever venture beyond the Nile River? There is an abundance of evidence that the shipmasters of ancient Egypt did not restrict themselves to the coastlines along the Nile. For instance, it is on record that Queen Hatshepsut sponsored an expedition to the land of Punt, a region that has been associated with modern-day Somalia or even further from the shores of Egypt. This was as far back as 1470 BCE. The most interesting thing about the Punt voyage is the details recorded in reliefs. The reliefs show large ships filled to the brim with exotic produce sourced from far away. The depictions of the ships show they were made by people with advanced knowledge of what it takes for a very large vessel to survive the harsh reality and rigors of deep-sea navigation. Another piece of evidence, a quite strong one, that ancient Egyptians knew or visited the Americas is the striking similarity in architecture of both places. When most people think of Egypt, the picture that comes to their minds includes pyramids. The North African country boasts many iconic pyramids that amaze people due to their massive sizes and precision in construction. Would you be surprised to learn that the Americas also hosts massive pyramids built in ancient times? You will find the popular Pyramid of the Sun in Teotihuacan, Mexico. Now, why would both cultures make massive investments in constructing these giant structures? In both places, the giant pyramids served similar purposes, such as grand burial structures and temples. Apart from the similarity in shape, the pyramids on both continents were constructed from the same large blocks made from stones, and the builders ensured they were aligned with astronomical phenomena. The Egyptian builders actually aligned their own structures with the Orion's belt stars, which they associated with a god of the afterlife named Osiris. There are other similarities between these cultures separated by thousands of water, which was significant for a time that many people today believed it was not possible to sail very far at sea. For example, we have already talked about the hieroglyphs of Egypt in this video, but the Aztecs, Maya, and other Mesoamerican cultures made extensive use of hieroglyphs too as parts of their system of writing. They were as complex and nuanced as their Egyptian counterparts, but that is not all. Both places had a belief system that incorporated a multitude of gods, and the gods played important roles in the day-to-day lives of the people. The Egyptians boasted of at least a god for every aspect of the life and death that they could conceive, like Ra for the sun and Isis for motherhood. Even the embalming process had its own god too, known as Anubis. But there is more. The Nile River was the lifeline of the ancient Egyptians, with its fertile plains and water supporting agriculture through a complex system of irrigation. It was the same in the Andean cultures, where they developed similarly sophisticated irrigation systems to allow agriculture to thrive in the harsh environment. Both were able to grow crops that formed the staple of their diets, like wheat and barley in Egypt, and maize and potatoes in the Americas. Both civilizations achieved significant prosperity based on agriculture. Researchers have also found similarities in their craft. The Egyptians were master craftsmen, producing intricate jewelry, pottery, and statues. The same was true in the Americas, whose skilled artisans also made advanced art, like carvings and monumental stone heads. One adventurous man actually set out to prove that the ancient Egyptians could have actually sailed to the Americas, and the results of his expeditions are fascinating. His name was Thor Heyerdahl, and his string of sailing experiments catapulted him to fame. His first adventure was the Kon-Tiki expedition of 1947. His theory was that the Polynesian islands were occupied by people originally from South America, instead of from Asia, as accepted by mainstream scientists. And what better way to prove it than by actually following a sailing route between the two places, under conditions as similar as possible to what they were in ancient times? Heyerdahl gathered a team of 5, and together, they fashioned a raft out of balsa wood and other materials that the ancient South American people could find. The raft was christened Kon-Tiki, derived from a mythical hero in Inca folktales. The crew followed designs taken from the descriptions of Spanish conquistadors who saw the local rafts. They also consulted ancient drawings and models. Kon-Tiki launched from Peru and sailed more than 4,300 miles on the Pacific Ocean. It shored at the Tuamotu Islands after 101 days. According to Heyerdahl, the success of his voyage was proof that pre-Columbian South African people could sail to Polynesia using the materials and technology available to them. It was after this iconic voyage that Heyerdahl turned his attention to Egypt. He soon started planning another ambitious trip, which he called the Ra expeditions. This time, the explorer was trying to prove that the Egyptians of ancient times had the capability to execute long-distance sea voyages. So he set out to test the possibility of going between the shores of Africa and the shores of the Americas. For this epic trip, Heyerdahl constructed 2 boats named Ra 1 and Ra 2. They were made entirely from papyrus and used the same technique the ancient Egyptians used to build their boats. Heyerdahl recruited boat builders from Lake Chad in the Republic of Chad. They used their traditional technique, which was based on the same materials and techniques from thousands of years ago in Egypt. Heyerdahl took off inside Ra 1 from the west coast of Africa in 1969. However, he failed to arrive at his destination. The boat could not make it to the Caribbean. However, Heyerdahl refused to give up. He tried again in 1970 using Ra II, and he was able to sail from Morocco to Barbados. The journey took him 57 days, but it aptly demonstrated that it was possible for the ancient Egyptians to have sailed to the Americas with the help of their technology and navigation skills. But that was not the end of Heyerdahl's sea travels. He would embark on a third voyage, this time going from the Tigris River in Iraq down the Persian Gulf, crossing the Arabian Sea, and going to the Red Sea. This was a 4,000-mile trip, which he completed with the help of an international crew. Again, Heyerdahl fashioned a boat out of reeds. His goal was to demonstrate that the ancient Sumerian people could have spread their culture in Southwest Asia and the Arabian Peninsula by sailing in similar boats. But another discovery that points to contact between the ancient Egyptians and the Americas is one that would shock you. It was the discovery of coca and nicotine in Egyptian mummies that made researchers link the two ancient civilizations together. The weird aspect was that coca and nicotine were believed to have originated from South America. Imagine the shock when scientists discovered cocaine made from coca and nicotine made from tobacco plants in the bodies of these ancient Egyptians. This monumental finding was spearheaded by Dr. Svetlana Balabanova, a highly regarded toxicologist. She collected samples from the hair, skin, and bones of 3,000-year-old mummies kept in the Munich Egyptian Museum. The results caused a stir when published, showing evidence that the Egyptians were familiar with cocaine and tobacco, even though they were not native to their region. Even though there was initial skepticism at the findings in the scientific community, they had to bow to the superior evidence. This led people to propose that a trade route directly linked the two sides across the Atlantic Ocean, and the ancient mariners must have been traversing the route. They must have been helped by the ocean currents found in that specific route. It was very similar to how ocean currents assisted the Vikings in navigating to North America, or how Polynesian seafarers traveled across the Pacific to remote islands. Meanwhile, other people proposed an indirect trading route. In this scenario, items originating from South America, like cocaine and nicotine, would have been passed from one group to another through multiple trading posts until they made their way to Egypt. They theorized some of these networks of trading routes would have passed through Europe. However, this was just a possibility, and didn't eliminate the possibility of a more direct link between Egypt and the Americas. In the end, when it comes to whether the ancient Egyptians were able to reach the Americas, we need to ask ourselves if we are not too scared to admit that an ancient Egyptian civilization had what it took to sail across continents.